to matter 7. So there's a proposed modification and an update in terms of sort of site searching. So the modification proposed uses the GTA assessment of need, which identified for 23 period of time, but you're proposing to include a need 2027. Sorry, did you start? Sorry, right. Sorry. So you're proposing modification to refer to the need over the same period as housing assessment for the 2027 onwards.
Yeah. So
basically.
Yes. And yeah, a 10-year target to align with the requirement in the policy H14, which requires the rate of the 10-year target in the policy text, which is
right. Okay. So what's happened to the other 4? This is the necessity needed.
They're not included in the target, but we have. Yeah, I mean, the reason we've done it for 10 years is, when we spoke to the GLA, we were originally proposing to include a discussion of the broader need. The GLA suggested that they wanted the target to be the 10-year period, so we included that in the policy and then included the breakdown of the need over that 10-year justification text.
So the need for 23 is based on what period?
That's the 2038.
From 2022.
2020. I want to say, or 22. Yeah. So when we did the gypsy and travel needs assessment.
Okay. And that broke me down into years, which were 15 were needed by 2027. Right. From 19.
We effectively looked to, so the need up until the first 5 years post-adoption, we've looked to include all of that need, that sort of backlog in 2021, and had the need up to 2020. I can't remember exactly, but the last year of the 5 years is the point at which we sort of, we've grouped all that need up to that point into the first 5 years, and then the other 5 years are the need beyond that.
I'm just trying to work out where the 4 have got. So it's only looking to 2037 now, as the need was to 2038.
Yeah, so that would be 4 pitches that we identified within the gypsy accommodation assessment that aren't included within the target.
But that need still exists, presumably.
Yes, it's effectively like the results from population growth, I think, within the community that were under the 2022 GTAA.
But unless some of the 23 has been showing the need up to 2038, it's still 23.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So surely if you set a need for 2027 to 2037, shouldn't it be 23 to be?
I suppose so, yeah. I mean, we could.
I can't quite see why it's been reduced down to 19.
I mean, the reason that we did it is to align it with need over the period of the target. It broke down the need based on the years that it would, that the target would.
Yeah, so
imply, if you know what I mean. So that's why we chose to set it at 19. Yeah.
And I was saying as well, also the wording for that policy also came from the GP.
Yeah.
And they were quite adamant about making sure we put the 10-year in rather than.
Yeah, I can understand why you might want to cover a 10-year period and running it from 27 to 37. Makes sense because it's consistent with the approach to mainstream housing. I'm just thinking, I can't really need for them. I think I understand whether it seems to me that just lost it so that 4 that it hasn't been met. Okay. And in terms of the work that's been ongoing with the GLA and London-wide assessment, is there any further update with that?
Yes, it's been published now, and the need period that it covers, I believe, doesn't actually extend to the length of our plan period. And the study, admittedly, I've read it only once or twice, but the study aligns the calculation of need, my reading of it, with what we were already produced in our gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment, because they did the study and they looked at these for all of the boroughs, but those that had an up-to-date gypsy and traveller accommodation assessment, they had a slightly separate methodology. We're going to a further updated meeting on it next week, I believe, to find out a little bit more about the findings of it. But my reading of it was that it doesn't actually update on the figure from what we've got in our institution.
Right. Okay. So your position is that the GTA assessment that you did 2022 or ORS did, was it ORS or?
Yes, ORS.
Did is up to date.
Yes.
It's based the need almost. It's based on those existing residents who are living on the site. It's their additional needs are that's assessed.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think just to say on the broader point about the wider need, I think, if that were to be included, perhaps, I mean, given that we have set the 10-year target in the policy, I do, get your point about not acknowledging that broader need that the study identified, perhaps in the monitoring framework or something like that, we could reference to it or just text. But anyway,
I know you don't want to create apparent inconsistency with the approach to housing targets anyway, but this is quite specific, and if it's associated with those people living and none of the need has been met, it seems to me there's still a need for 23 villages. It should be met. I mean, okay, but so we've got 2021 or 2022, all of it's met, it's still there. We're looking to 2037, it's only 2038, so I mean, you'll be able to see one pitch off or something. I mean, you can explain the maths of things in the way factual. I mean, it was assessed based on the families. It was over that period. Provision hasn't been made since 2022. Therefore,
no, I think so.
10 years. And it seems okay.
No, I think that makes sense.
I mean, whether it can be met, like it's another matter. If we want to, but the policy. Well, I mean, I think it is probably important. I mean, it does refer back to basically saying if windfall sites go forward. Right, that's even not. It does. It basically says if windfall sites have gone forward, the evidence by need, the starting point is the GTA and what that assessment is. So I think if then the plan just refers to the 19 and the GTA looks 23, it causes a bit of confusion, doesn't it, about what it is? So it'd be easier to present it in that way. Okay, well, so leave that one. Okay. I'll ask about this, but the PTS was updated to reflect the definition. It was 3 or something. But it was updated again in the last couple of years to broaden the definition somewhat beyond gypsies and travellers to all other persons with a cultural tradition of nomadism or of living in a caravan, which I've not seen. I've not seen a report yet. What that means, I don't actually know where it came from. It's PPTX, isn't it? But I suppose that isn't MRS addressed. I know they looked at their assessment of the needs was the broader based on those families and their gypsy and traveller families. They didn't rule out those that didn't meet the strict definition of the earlier PPTS.
No, so we had yeah, when we started in 2015, BPTS was still there, but we decided to undertake a study looking at any need that was sort of owed, you know, if a household, you know, had a right to culturally appropriate housing under the Housing Act or anything else, we wanted to study for comprehensively what the need was. So there wasn't any, you know, particular need. It was just assessed as not conforming part of the 2015 BPTS definition need. Does that make sense?
Yes, okay. But ORS, so they did the job and they identified specific people, some met the definition of continuing to be travelling, others are settled. But all of that was lumped together, and that's the 23, so that's fine. But the Egyptian Travellers Regulation points out that the number, the 2021 census identified 390 people who self-identified as Egyptian Travellers, and that's far greater than the number of people on the other side. So again, that need was unable to be. I mean, ORS didn't get very far at all in terms of identifying whether any of that would be any pitches, which isn't unusual. I mean, but no one allowed to pay for that, I don't think, in figures, was it?
No, it was before the 2021 census was released.
Right, okay. But I guess the 2011 census was, you know, a similar high number. Okay, well, yeah. Okay, well, so that's what we've got. There's nothing coming out from the GLA that's likely to change anything significantly in any way. That's got that evidence. Right, so subject to whatever I might suggest in terms of the 23 or 19 or whatever, we'll move on to. I mean, I think the principle of modifying the plan to identify what it is, setting the target or say you want the GLA or saying under relevant and then at the end the BPTS. So that brings us on to what the product does. So that's submitted. It refers to safeguarding existing sites, and that's shown on the policy map. Looking at the policies map again, I think as submitted includes this green area to the south of the existing traveller pitches, which has now been identified as potentially suitable and available.
Yes. So when we submitted the plan, we had that site to south, which is calculated that can deliver 2 pitches, and then subsequent to the plan being submitted, that we sort of mentioned it in our matters response, but at the same time we do the council is also doing a comprehensive review of its small sites, so anything in council ownership, and looking at potential uses for that land. And one of those potential uses is looking at whether or not sites are suitable for gypsy and pitches. And we've been doing further work with assets, albeit that work is still ongoing on asset side, to see if there are any further sites that we might also include as suitable for gypsy and pitches. And we've also identified, I think we believe in our matters response, but also the open green space.
Yes.
Site.
Yeah.
We've also is suitable availability, and we would like to amend policies map that also identify that as part of that broader safeguarding.
So is that owned by the council? Okay. So on the policies moment, it's got what looks like a church on it.
Basically, the council's ownership of all of the green space outside of the church. Okay. So the church is like its own freehold ownership, and then the rest of it, the bit that's sort of outlined in the capacity work, is basically all of the green space is council owned.
Okay. So then on that little plan that you put in, it shows 3 pitches around the church. The grey blob is still the church being there.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that identifies. So the policies map would be identified. Would be modified. Sorry, to capture the additional bits. Where would this the modification? Yeah, the modification doesn't refer to the Or does it?
In the changes to the policy that we proposed, in like the second bullet point, so I've included a new bullet point that says what the target is. Potentially you might update it to 23 now. And then it says designated site is safeguarded for gypsy and traveller accommodation, and the advancement of web means for intensification or expansion of the site which to contribute to meeting the 10-year pitch target. So we sort of included a reference to it in there.
Yeah, and if you were to designate, if you hatch it all over, well, at the moment wouldn't it be better to have the existing site? The policies submitted says the designated duty travel site is safeguarded, so that implies it's existing use.
Yes.
But presumably include the space to the south.
At the moment, we had, potentially it might not be the most sensible way of doing it, but at the moment we had designated on the policies map at Red 19 the existing pitches plus that extension to the south to like safeguard that extra bit of that duty and travel pitches.
I suppose it's really good. But anyway, the policy map would be modified in one way or another. Somewhere would it be sensible to refer to this capacity for 5, or is that not necessary?
I think that would be.
Is that in the?
I mean, I don't think we'd have a problem.
Is that in the modifications? It is extracted.
We haven't outlined a specific number of pitches. I mean, that's an initial kind of high level bit of capacity work that we did, but I don't think we could be opposed to very specific number.
Yeah, the modification to 3195, going back to the need. It says the GTA are under need for 23 pitches in the borough to 2038, that's fine. That was what it was originally said. With a need of 19 10 years post adoption of the plan, including the backlog need from 20. Does it include the backlog?
So it doesn't in the table, but effectively, so we've got 17 pitches would include that, the need prior to 2027 as well. So I thought
But then that adds to 19. And so do you expect the last 4 then? You say would be?
I think it would be 2030. Let me have a quick look at the list study just to double check. It's now yeah, 100%. Yeah, here we go. Would it be helpful if I showed you my laptop?
Yeah.
So the number. So that's the need breakdown. So
it is old. So the 4 is in the last year.
Yes, I'm not quite sure why it broke down like that. But,
in that case, okay. Well, I think that's okay. Sorry, I didn't realise that there was 4 in that last year. It may be because that's with.
I think it might be to do with
people who aren't born yet, who hadn't been born. Maybe.
I think it's an assumption based on how many households there are. I mean, this might be too much. I think it's based on how many people there are in the existing site, and then there's assumption about how much that the population there might grow.
Yeah.
And I think that more accounts for the much later phase need, whereas the earlier need is based on there's an overcrowded pitch and someone might need.
Or a child that's 12 and they're pitch in 9 years. Okay, understood. Okay, thank you. So, but okay. Okay, well, I don't, so it's I suppose it. Going back to what you're saying about small size, so you've got potential 5 identified.
Yes.
Are there any others that
are
likely to be or?
There are, yes. The timeline for those at the moment is so assets are looking to address this quite quickly at the moment, but we don't have the certainty yet as to whether or not they would definitely be brought forward for gypsy and traveller pitches over other uses, which is why we've only looked to allocate the one entry plot that had the greatest degree of certainty. And of course, that's a site that's next to the existing gypsy and traveller site, but other sites might be at different, locations in the borough. We are, along with our mayor, working to have a meeting with gypsies and travellers in the weeks the next 3 weeks, I think, to start having some of those sites and understanding when the community would support them if the council wants to take it forward.
Yeah, because these are pitches that would have to meet the needs of these people on this park site, existing site, park site.
Yeah.
So it would be, depends where they are, and yeah. So if the council's saying, well, we own it and we can make it available to you, I said, okay. But in terms of approximate numbers, are we talking several pitches? I mean, if these, what at any one site is the minimum size?
We don't know for sure. We're still going through that assessment process. But the thinking is that they will come forward as before, because they're small sites they're looking at. We don't know what sites will be taken forward as yet. It's one of the council's priority to do with the
I suppose in terms of national planning policy versus the council's asset management, which I can fully understand. National planning policy would expect the plan to, suppose, push the asset managers to give priority to meeting these needs. I'm not saying necessarily it is possible to allocate sites. I'm just thinking whether at the moment it's an enabling development management approach or supportive development management approach on unallocated sites, but nothing more than that, is it? I suppose you're setting a target. So the shortfall would be if this 5 was acknowledged, could be, because you've got enough evidence about availability and suitability and capacity, I think, to acknowledge this 5 could be provided here. That would still leave the 14, if you're taking the 19, leaving the other 12 for later. So it still leave a considerable amount. Okay. But your feeling is that there isn't, you couldn't allocate sites at this stage.
Yeah, I don't think
that's not possible.
Yeah, at the moment, from planning perspective, at least, we don't have certainty. I think we have always raised this as a need that needs to be addressed around this council small site asset management programme, if you call it, and we've sort of tried to as well to make sure that that is felt amongst not just ourselves but the whole council. Try and get an understanding.
And this exercise that's going on, it is only council land.
Yes.
Not other public sector land. Or
no, just council.
That's because
we didn't feel that we would have certainty on the availability of sites. We did consider whether or not, when the PPTS definition changed, whether or not we could mandate some of that delivery on, privately owned sites or other landowners, and spoke to Camden, who've been going through a similar approach in their local plan examination, and they had suggested a similar approach, and I think the inspector in Camden accepted that because there wasn't a certainty around availability of those sites. The landowners hadn't suggested to bring forward pitches, which is why we didn't consider that further.
It's probably important to point out that we went over and above in finding sites, the sites exercise, and even after the Regs 19 stage, we still kind of encourage the council to try and close that gap, which is what they are doing as part of the asset review. but because there's no certainty in it, I think it could come, when it does get that certainty, it could come forward as windfall sites, and we've got like a strong policy to bring that forward.
Well, there's an enabling policy or a supportive policy, but there isn't, there's a target. But this is where I'm just sort of slightly, because the council own them, they are potentially suitable, should the plan being a bit stronger in terms of giving priority to that particular use, which, you know, not be the highest value use, but, you know, given what the, you know, the national plan policy priority for meeting these needs and treating communities the same way as, you know, other elements of the community. Okay, but I don't think it would be right necessarily to talk about in the plan the council-owned site being necessarily practically, that's what you're saying, that's the only thing that has been identified as being potentially available, isn't it? So, okay. But so just give me a rough feel for this exercise that's going on in terms of the numbers of bits of land, like numbers of small sites, like dozens, hundreds.
We looked at nearly one of them is more, but we looked at, I think, about, I want to say about 10-ish different plots of land. And then from that exercise, I think we looked at it from a planning perspective and we were like, okay, flood zones it in.
Yeah.
You know, is traffic, like, could you realistically like get a caravan onto it quite safely? And when we looked at that additional data, I think we narrowed it down to about 5 or 6 areas planned, something like that. Is that right?
Yeah. We know the number of inches. It's like in total, including the fire, around 21.
And we presented this additional work that we undertook on capacity to our assets colleagues.
Yeah.
So we've kind of pushed it as far as we can in planning, and now we're waiting on our kind of assets colleagues to confirm.
Yeah, and now we're sort of, we've got the ones that we could be made available, and they're sort of working through the other sites because they think that you could prioritize for housing, which we need more housing, social housing, and depending on the location, some of them could come forward for gypsies and travellers. So that decision is not finalised yet, and nor we at the stage for that decision to be finalised.
No.
Because at the end of the day, it's down to sort of corporate to the land to be available for that use.
Okay, interesting. Yes, so it's what the plan should say in that context, isn't it? Okay, thank you. That's helpful. So, I mean, what you then talked about then is of these 5 or 6 with potential capacity for 60 or so. That was 5 that you identified broadly in line with meeting needs. All of them. Right. I think that covers that. The modification also introduces a positive or a supportive approach to transit sites and sites with negotiated stopping, which was one of the issues that the Gypsy Transit Group had raised, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So that's a response to that, I guess.
Yes.
So this is, again, it's supportive. Yes, where they meet identified need. So they alluded to sort of an enforcement approach that's been taken by the council for unauthorised stopping because it's creating problems or whatever. What's if a transit site or a negotiated stopping site is brought forward, that would be a council level, not necessarily. Or it could be.
Yeah, it could potentially be either. I mean, presumably the council, as well as part of this assets programme, we've also raised that while you do have higher thresholds for kind of pitches, transit, the community raised to us that transit position could be a successful way of meeting members of the community's needs for homeless as like an appropriate form of accommodation and that would be culturally appropriate. So we've also raised the assets in terms of this wider this broader policy position that could allow for those sorts of uses for non-permanent pitches on bits of council land that might be less like residents. There's less like a higher threshold that they have to meet the permanent sites. So we have raised that as well on our assets colleagues.
So what would be the planning position for a negotiated stoppings or a transit site? So if a transit site could be a site that's got commission as a transit site, could it? But any resident would only be there conditioned to be temporary.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so like a sort of temporary housing in the same way.
Yeah,
you might a negotiated stopping site for a period of X amount of years in our policy about mid-market uses as well. Be relevant when you consider that in terms of like looking at what the impacts might be. So it's similar for the developer wants to report a commercial while use on a site allocation, we'd look at what the impacts are and then use and then
And the national policy on flood risk, flood zone 2, is caravans for permanent accommodation highly vulnerable. Wouldn't that apply to a transit site? I know it's not permanent, but it's not.
You could allow they're less vulnerable in terms of the flood classification, so you could deliver them on flood zone 3. Whereas for permanent pitches, they can go on flood zone 1 or flood zone 2 in exceptional circumstances where it's a test is met. So there is a slightly less rigorous threshold flood zone wise for transit pitches.
It is if you accept a transit permanent residence. I know it's not permanent forever, but it just seems to me if you've got a site that's going to be always occupied as a transit site, there's always going to be people there. They're highly vulnerable.
I guess it comes back to the fact that a lot of the authorities. So
yeah, well, that's why I think it's significant, isn't it? Right, okay, so anyway, that creates the policy, I suppose, it doesn't identify any sites, but it flags it up as a use that's they would be supported. Okay, thank you. Right, now, I think you may have picked up some of the in trouble group suggested some modifications to a number of other 8 policies refer to specialist housing, just in ways of life. But I think, are they in the schedule? Some of those
So some of them are. So the ones that we looked to make the changes for were the monitoring criteria. So we didn't have target monitoring criteria, and now we've updated that to the target that's policy.
Yeah.
And the second modification we made was to the housing mix policy, and that was to include reference to the gypsy traveller accommodation assessment, distinct demand.
Yeah.
So those were the 2 modifications we made.
They're ones that you categorised as not main ones, I think.
Yes, I think they were probably ones to improve the plan.
Minor.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the one referring to the GTAA, that would be a minor, because that's just a factual monitoring. Well, the monitoring would just be a consequence of this. One time to each step. Right, okay, thank you. So that just brings me finally on to the element, the development management policy, I suppose, in essence, of H10, which is up to what we're talking about. It's supportive developments that propose a combination to meet the needs that should be located in legal criteria. So, it's the first one not in the green on malls, that's the policy and and this is back to the flood, where they're providing permanent accommodation, flood zone 1 or exceptionally in flood zone 2. So when it says exceptionally in flood zone 2, national policy has is that what exceptionally means?
I think so, yeah. Yeah, so it's like.
Yeah, I suppose that's okay. And but it goes on to refer to the meeting requirements of CE7. The CE7
It's the flood risk policy.
yeah, which refers to tests. Certainly refers to sequential.
Yeah, yeah.
So they pick it up in that way. But I mean, because so much of Newham is flood zones 2 and 3, it's going to be hard to find sites that are all in flood zone 1.
Yes, I mean, flood zone 2 and 3 covers large parts, so it covers, this might be slightly like broad, but it covers sort of the Stratford, kind of parts of Stratford, I think, down the western side of the borough and towards the south near the docks. So there are parts of the borough kind of thinking kind of more sort of that way.
Okay. Yeah.
Park, Forest Gate, where there is less of a flood risk. So when we looked at the council assets, we did look at what flood zone they were in.
Yeah.
And that's, and we did still manage to identify some. So it's not the whole borough that's in the flood zone, but you're right, there is a significant borough that is in the flood zone we have to consider.
And if it was flood zone 2, it would be subject to policy CE7, so sequential, and exception tests. So the sequential tests would be identified as being suitable. And the exception test would be essentially about making it safe, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because you test the need element would be can't be met anywhere else.
Yeah.
And it's meeting identified. So it only about showing safe. Which brings us on to CE7, hotel lunchtime. One of the things is floor levels, which it doesn't. Does that work for caravans?
Sorry, we'll have to get back to you on that one about that floor level one.
Yeah, I mean it's 300 finished floor levels above the level is, I guess.
Whether that can be a structure on there for the caravans to go on, I don't know.
And it was written presumably for a building, and I can see any design in, but for how you apply it to a caravan.
There's probably multiple designs.
Yeah, so maybe we'll pick that up in CE7 just for detail. But you know, I know that you try hard to identify sites, but it kind of this all reinforces a different approach, doesn't it? Because you can apply this test and find sites that are suitable and not at flood risk, you know, through the plan making process. I know we are. Then the clause is about finding sites as negotiated stopping. That's one. And basically, the transit sites, it says in flood zone 2, sequential test, i.e. not requiring exceptions test. And that's because you're saying it's not permanent resident.
Yes, I think, bear with me, it was. Yes, so I think we drew that threshold from the MPPF and the PPG about, at what level that the need for the exceptions or the needs of the sequential test triggered. And for transit sites, it was lower, which is why we slightly amended it.
Yeah, I can see, but I'm still not quite sure it's right, because ultimately it's to safeguard life and health. So if you've got a transit site, there's always going to be used as a transit site. There's always going to be people living there in a caravan. It may be different people coming and going, it's a transit site, but there's always, so whenever that flood risk happens, there's going to be someone living there.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's permanent. It's a permanent use of that land for caravans as accommodation. And each caravan is going to so I'm not sure exempting it from the exception test as a flood zone 2.
No, that's fair. I mean, I think we would be opposed to requiring the exceptions test for
Flood zone 2
as a mod. I think that's a useful.
I mean, I think if that were the case, we did the way we all need anything, because you don't always distinction between permanent and transit.
Yeah.
But we have to think about that. It's one of those things, isn't it, where the definition of highly vulnerable in the end is caravans used for so that's trying to distinguish between holiday caravans and better thought, isn't it? Obviously, there's an intention behind it, but I'm just thinking when you've got if a transit site was a transit site and it's always going to be used, it seems to me there's always going to be somebody living there. Oh, okay. Right. So, okay, we'll have a think about that. Maybe it doesn't matter too much, but I'm just wondering whether it's exempted. Because really, it's ultimately making arrangements in place to make sure it's safely, on site, isn't it? Evacuation, things like that, which safe. And it's fine. The only other clause I was going to ask you about is the last one. The site is in a sustainable location, appropriate for residential development, fine. In reasonable proximity to relevant services and facilities to transport it. Which is different. It's different terminology used in the plan. Talked about accessible locations. I think in reference to PTAL. I'm just wondering what wouldn't be a sustainable location.
Probably.
I mean, you talked about the town centre network when it's been enhanced. Everywhere will be within 400 metres walk of the town centre, apart from I think a limited number of places that you talk. I don't know. Is that a necessary clause at all? And does it mean an accessible location? What else would make it not sustainable? Inappropriate surrounding uses, I suppose. It seems to be all about accessibility.
Yeah,
really.
I mean, it's mainly about making sure that residents have got access to the infrastructure they need, which we would, which I think would be the same for general needs housing. Like it wouldn't be within proximity of the town centre to be delivered. It would just be in an area of the borough where you could, people could safely access the infrastructure, which I think is why we included it. But no, I get it.
Okay, well, it's in there. It's not a mod, so it's whether it's okay. But so that's what it's about, accessibility. Access to services. Right. Good. Okay. After anything else on that, no, I suppose let's just have a quick look at, make sure since they're not here. You usually had a meeting with them recently. That was to talk about the mods that you're working up, was it?
Yes.
So they're generally, what's their reaction? Support it or going in the right direction?
I think in terms of the provision of 5 pitches, I think that's supported, but I think generally the feeling was that the council should be doing more to meet that broader need for pitches. So yeah, I think that would be fair.
Yeah, okay. And were for that meeting, was that just with the planners or was it with the asset management?
It was with planning, assets, and then
Okay.
yeah, I guess the other point to raise that came across in that meeting that perhaps hasn't been captured by the reps, which I think is something you alluded to earlier, is that the community sort of noted that there was overcrowding and a need on the existing traveller pitch site we've got, but there's also more community need. And yeah, there kind of then became a more general discussion about kind of how you're allocating those pitches, which was outside of our area.
But when they talk about this, I mean, they refer to the census and they say, well, the number of pitches is only 20% of what people have identified as being travelling, living in bricks and mortar. But they don't really take, again, they refer to one Irish traveller family. That's the only specific. So, I mean, they say LRS do what they do. But they didn't contact any of the people living in bricks and mortar houses.
There was I think they've reached, it will be within the Gypsy Traveller Accommodation Assessment, but they did reach out broadly, I believe, to gypsies and travellers, I think, at the time, to see if there were further contact with bricks and mortar. And I think some people in bricks and mortar were spoken to as part of the study, but it will be, it will be a gypsy and traveller accommodation needs assessment about how that methodology. So there were interviews that took place on the existing site, but then there were broader, I think, interviews undertaken.
But presumably, as housing authority, the council would have some knowledge of any of these.
Yes, I believe there is a sort of, I think the people that manage the sites have a list of accommodation, but I think that's part of these broader discussions that came out of our meeting on Friday, is that we need to have a look at this allocations policy in a little bit more detail.
Okay, well, right. Anything else for today? No? Okay, on that one. So we're back tomorrow. Just while I think of it, actually, I was thinking about possibly if we need any more sitting days, when it would be best be. Charlotte, I think, has she been in touch with you about this? She said she was going to contact you and suggest the week commencing 2nd of March. I did look back actually in one of my notes. We did talk about potential reserve days being 16th of February. You got that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that we still want to confirm whether that's possible.
Yeah. So what would your preference be? Did we speak about 16th? The week beginning 16th of February?
Yeah.
Oh, we did. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. And from your point of view, that would be possible.
Yes.
Oh, better.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, let me think about that then. Sorry, I've forgotten about this. So that would be just when we're back. I suppose. I mean, I'm not saying we do need extra time, extra days, but it depends. It depends where the monster might be and whether we need to talk about it. Okay, right. Well, let's try and fix something by the end of this week then, really, what it would be if we can do that. Which again might. Okay, good. Right, so we'll finish there for today. We'll be back tomorrow on the tall buildings again and the housing development management policies. Thank you.
Thank you.